the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. It is Kyle and Lindsay. This week we're doing a Q&A, and we've got quite the setup going on in our living room. It's 8:45. I will spare you the details of how crazy the week has been, but we both looked at each other and said, if we're doing this, we're doing it on the couch. So we are coming to you live from the couch with a Q&A. Got quite a few of them that we've been stockpiling that you guys have sent in. So we're going to cover as many as we can here. And if it starts to get too lengthy, maybe we'll break it up into two parts, but that's largely going to be up to you and how many questions you ask. So
protein products seem like glorified treats, are they?
First question for you. What do you think about when you hear things like protein bars or protein cookies or protein chips, or because that's largely what they are alluding to here?
I think that you need to learn to eat chicken and eggs, or teach your kids to, I guess. I don't know. No, often people that I know, I guess in my circle, they're eating or giving their children protein bars because they like them, right? They think, oh, they're going to miss these nutrients because they don't want to eat all these other foods, and it's a quick way to get that. Quick way to get it.
Yeah, so to answer the question more directly, they said they seem like treats, glorified treats, are they? I would say yes and no. No, in the sense of, they generally are higher in protein than your average cookie or chip or whatever. But they are glorified treats in the sense of they're not really providing any like actual satiety, right? One of the greatest values of having a diet that's high in protein is not that you hit this arbitrary number and then at that arbitrary number it triggers something that automatically makes you lose more or less weight than you would without hitting that number. A lot of the reasons that high protein diets work so well is because it is so filling. Protein is so filling, and depending on the protein source that you choose, it's generally going to be really filling in really low number of calories, which means you're probably not going to eat as much as you generally would, which means you're going to be in a deficit, which means you're going to lose weight. So if you're eating a lot of these products thinking you're following a high protein diet, you're meeting a number, but the whole value of meeting that number is lost. The second element of this is that the type of protein that these products use is generally like a whey concentrate or a whey isolate, which is not all protein, especially not a concentrate. Sometimes only 40% of what's in a concentrate is actual protein, which kind of leads me to the third element and really on, what seals the deal for me on them being glorified treats. A vast majority of the calories that are in some of these products, especially things that are more dessert-like, like now they've got protein cinnamon rolls and protein bars. Vast majority of the calories in these are coming from carbohydrates and fats. And so you're buying it under the assumption of, oh, this is a really great way for me to get a lot of protein in. But in all reality, it's getting some protein in a much higher calorie package, which is ultimately not helping you for the whole reason you would even want to be eating a lot of protein as a snack. So yeah, I think a short answer to this would be yes, they are glorified treats. Anything you want to go off that? All right. I think in fairness to anybody listening, because this is generally the question that follows whenever I have answered this in the past is, okay, well, what would you eat instead? And they're typically wanting, like, the reason people grab these is because they're fast, right? They're quick and they don't have to think about it. They can buy 5 or 6 or 7 or a bulk pack of 10 for the week and then just eat them all week and feel like, okay, well, I'm meeting this protein number. What would you say is good because like you deal with the kids during the day, you try to, deal with your own nutrition. What would you say is like a good, fairly quick protein option that's not a bar?
I think the go-to, and I know there's an issue with this, one of the go-tos we've gone to is nuts, and I think a lot of people I've been around are like, "Oh, peanut butter," like, for the most part, kids like peanut butter, right? If they're not allergic, but like you said before, what is it, like, nuts and peanut butter is mostly a fat with some protein, right? So does it fill the kids up? Yes, but is it the best source? No, but we do eat nuts, it's one for us, and peanut butter things, which doesn't really fill a kid. But something else that we'll do, especially if it's been a successful hunting season, is take jerky. They really like that a lot. I like that a lot. Jerky and sometimes not lunch meat, like salami. That's been nice to have for a snack. I mean, for the most part, it stays good, even if it's not like freezing cold or whatever. Gosh, what's something else that we take?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard, particularly because most protein options have to be refrigerated to some degree. Like a few go-tos would be exactly what you said, jerky or something along those lines. Those single serve packets of tuna or chicken salad or anything like that. If you're traveling somewhere and you've got access to your refrigerator, you're not gonna it's something's not gonna be out of the refrigerator for too long, or you can put it in a cooler, whatever. Any of those single serve high protein, yogurts, Greek yogurts, even overnight oats that you've made with some whey protein. Yes, it's similar, but it's much more filling than a bar, and you're not getting all the calories from carbs and fats like you are in a bar. And then one thing that we did for a while was we still buy or bake a whole chicken every week, at least one or two. And we'll typically take some of the meat off of that and make a chicken salad out of it. And so, like, we'll cut the chicken up, we'll cut some celery up. I'll take store-bought pickle relish, dump that in. But then we put Greek yogurt in with that, and then usually like some light mayo or whatever. That's nice to have, like, and the boys tend to like that for the most part, putting it on crackers or putting it on a sandwich or putting it on a wrap or whatever. But if you've got that already made in the fridge, it's easy to throw a couple of scoops on something and go if you're short on time, and it's going to be just, far better bang for your buck as far as a good go-to fast protein option that you're not having to like cook the night before. I would have said eggs, but I mean, you may as well eat gold now because they're just, I mean, they are insanity. I was thinking the other day we did a podcast. I guess it's been a couple of years ago about, what's the cheapest source of protein among all the proteins in the grocery store, and we ultimately came down to chicken breast and eggs. Eggs are out the window. Chicken breast is still kind of one of the gold standards, but at 50 cents an egg, at, a meager 4 grams of protein for an egg white, 6 grams of protein for a whole egg, it's going to be pretty pricey to get your protein dose in if you're going strictly off of that. All right. Number 2.
Is there anything that helps maintain a healthy liver, digestive tract, colon, detoxes, cleanses, and the like?
What experience do you have hearing about detoxes? You're laughing. Please tell the story you're thinking of.
Oh my gosh. The first detox thing I ever heard of, I think I was in junior high. I'll say I had a family member who had heard about this cleanse, and it was like lemon, what was it? Lemon, honey, and something else that was gonna like flush her system where she just like lived by the toilet, and supposedly it was supposed to be really healthy. So I thought it seemed ridiculous. I didn't get why she wasn't eating. I thought it was weird then. And then the other the other is they probably don't listen to this. It is a kind of neighbor of a relative, truly a neighbor of a relative. And our relative went to her house and they have whatever this colon cleanse bag is, and she does it on the daily. Like she cleanses her colon every single day and then just keeps it out. Like well, hopefully not the contents, but she keeps the supplies out just in the bathroom, hanging up, trying out the tubing or whatever. So I feel like our bodies are designed to naturally do what they're supposed to do as long as you put in what's supposed to go in and allow out what's supposed to come out. So I have never been drawn to the cleanse thing. Um, Sometimes it happens just after someone's been sick, right? Or you're on antibiotics, and it's never been a positive experience for me. So I would not be drawn to the cleanse business.
Yeah, come over for hors d'oeuvres and leave with a cleanse. We got whatever you need. This is a good question. This one actually came over around the New Year, so my apologies and kind of being late to the game on answering this. But I would say so, first and foremost, to answer the question pretty directly, your liver does, assuming you've got a healthy functioning liver, does a great job at cleaning up anything that you bring in that it recognizes as not necessarily supposed to be there. So you don't need to do any cleanse. People will often say, like, oh, I just felt so much better after a 72-hour cleanse, or I felt so much better after a 72-hour water fast, or whatever. That likely has less to do with the cleanse and less to do with the water fast and more to do with what you didn't eat then than anything else. But I mean, as hard of a line as we have drawn in the past about things like nitrates, because there's just so much that points a finger against them, this seems to be another one where it's like, yeah, there's just nothing that suggests that you need this external source of a cleanse to accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. I would say this because this person said, "Is there anything that helps maintain a healthy liver, digestive tract, colon, etc.?" And the heart of their question was, they were really focusing on just wanting to be healthy and avoid chronic disease of any kind, more so than just a general New Year's cleanse. And so here's like the top four that I would say, and this is when I say this, this isn't just my opinion. This is what we seem to see be the common denominator among, among everyone's recommendations in trying to live a long life and prevent chronic disease. So number one would be to weigh a weight that is appropriate for your height. And I think that that is largely because what we see in obesity is, again, there is a constant um, there is a constant hum of inflammation in the cells, and that constant hum essentially we know is at the core of all chronic diseases. So the more that the weight is at a weight that you are comfortable with has absolutely nothing to do with your appearance and everything to do with what's going on behind the scenes whenever you weigh a weight that is above what's healthy for your height.
What do you mean inflammation at the cells? You know I was gonna ask that, but inflammation is a buzzword that people throw out all the time, so
Yeah, this is always really hard to describe without getting into scientific terms, but and like you and I have had private conversations about this, and I think what's hard to grasp is that you can't see a cell, and the fact that we have so many of them and you can't physically pull one out is hard to even really put any imagery to. But that's exactly what we've got. And so those cells will cause, like when you say inflammation, let's say that they're not, I want to say the word recovering the same way, but that doesn't really elude the picture that I want. Not inflammation in the sense of like redness, you would think of, but it's just it's a cellular response. Like I don't know how else to describe it other than that.
and this might be a rabbit trail, but what does that experience look like? What are symptoms of that? Do they not feel well? Do they feel bloated?
No, and that's what's hard about it, right? Is you don't even know what's going on. And that's why I say it's underlying behind the scenes and chronically there. You know what I would describe it as is like a subtle gas leak or a carbon monoxide leak. You can't smell it. You may not even not feel well, but as time grows on, you start to develop headaches, and then before you know it, God forbid, if you don't fix it, something ends up happening. But in the meantime, you have no clue that it's really going on, which is why it's such a silent killer. But we know when we've researched all of these things like heart disease, things like diabetes, things that, are the root of most chronic diseases in the world are caused by, specifically whenever they're tied and correlated with obesity, are generally at the root cause because of that constant state of cellular inflammation that's going on. So that's number one, is whatever that weight is for that individual, weigh that as close to it as you can. Number two is eat mostly foods that you cook, mostly whole foods, single ingredient nutrient foods in a quantity that puts you at number one, right? One of the things, this may be controversial, one of the things that cracks me up about all of this conversation right now with all of this political conversation about trying to improve our food supply, and we'll just say red dye, right? Because right now that seems to be the one thing that we're trying to get out of the food supply. And recently, someone came on with a really popular podcast and said all Girl Scout cookies are bad because they came out with this research study where they found the byproducts of Roundup in 100% of every Girl Scout cookie. What's comical to me about this is how frustrated everyone gets, and they want all of this out of the food supply. And the whole time I'm thinking, if you just ate normal whole foods, you wouldn't have to worry about a lot of those things. So the more often the diet is from nutrient dense whole foods, very few packaged foods, very seldom are they eating out, and the quantity is appropriate for whatever the weight is, there generally is less overall health issues from a long-term standpoint. Number three, don't drink or don't smoke. And then number four, don't sit all day. So you got really four. Weigh whatever a healthy weight is supposed to be. Two, eat your nutrition in a way that is nutrient dense in the quantity that's going to line up with whatever number one is. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't sit all day. Overall, when you read literally every research study on mortality as it goes with overall health habits, those four seem to always be the takeaway in terms of reducing your risk of either developing chronic disease and typically also reduced risk of developing cancer. Any questions about the detoxes? All right. Number three.
We hear words like plateau and starvation, but don't quite know what to do with it. You said there isn't a starvation mode, but why do we plateau?
All right. This was a really good question. So we've got within our program, there's between 8 and 10 really core pillars, I think, that everyone who is trying to learn about nutrition really needs to know. And this is one. Why do we plateau? What's actually happening? What do we do about it? And, why is that not an issue long term whenever you think about, running our program for one? So first of all, one of the main reasons that a plateau is going to happen is because there's a built-in survival mechanism in us. If you had previously been eating 4,000 calories and you all of a sudden start eating 3,000 calories, which for anybody who, is unfamiliar with what that means, that's quite a bit of calories in a day, regardless. I mean, even for an athlete, that's a lot. Your body is going to perceive that you're no longer giving it what you had previously been giving it for an extended period of time. Its perception is going to be that there is a food shortage, and one of the ways it's going to begin to prepare for the food shortage is it's going to start to down-regulate how much energy it requires to do normal daily functions. So in other words, if you reduce your calorie intake, even if it's to a lower number that's still high, you're going to lower your metabolism as a part of its quote survival mechanism. So, as you can probably imagine, lowering your metabolism makes continued and ongoing weight loss really hard. If your goal is to lose 5 pounds, you may never deal with this. If your goal is to lose 15 pounds, you may deal with it once. If your goal is to lose 100, you may deal with it 4 or 5 times over the course of a year, in which your body is continually adapting and you're having to figure out how to get around it. The second element of is it's a decrease in overall body mass. So if you two think about two cars, right, driving on a freeway going up a hill. You and I tend to go past semis much faster going up a hill on a road trip than a semi does. Like we tend to go up that hill much quicker than a semi does, simply because in the car, we are much smaller from a weight perspective and a towing perspective than a semi is. So as your weight drops, your body's not only in that survival mechanism, you simply weigh less. It takes less fuel to have you operate. So as you weigh less, you need less and less to continue to lose weight. So, it's kind of the first couple strikes against you. Number 3 and 4, I think, are probably the biggest contributors the lower you get into an intake and the further you get into a program. So number 3 would be you start to have hormonal changes, and these are basically meant to keep you alive, but sabotage you if the goal is weight loss. So your hunger hormone increases dramatically. The hormone that generally prevents you from eating or tells you when you're full decreases dramatically. And so you have these signals being sent to your brain that are basically screaming at you to eat. The popular buzzword right now for this is the food noise, right? So the food noise is really loud when you're in a deficit and you're trying to lose weight. But this goes back to the first thing we covered. This is why high protein diets and weight loss can be so helpful, because they are so filling in so few calories and they help combat some of these hormonal changes that are going on. Which leads to number 4. You have an internal mechanism that wants to suppress how much movement you have during a day. We call this the NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So in other words, not only is your brain screaming at you to eat more, it's going to start sending cues to you that says move less. We recognize you're not getting as much, therefore you don't have a lot to expend, so we're going to send cues to you that say expend less, eat more, so that we can get back to an equilibrium that you've told us to be at for so long. Now, you have to be pretty present in mind to kind of go through this in the beginning, right? There's a lot of mental tools that you can use to combat it. There's a lot of eating strategies that you can give people to combat it. But that again is why we have a whole maintenance phase of our program, is because if you were to leave a person dealing with these things forever, the likelihood of their long-term success is pretty low. But if you give them the tools to navigate through this, and then you run a maintenance phase, which is the third phase of our program, you actually bring a person out of the deficit. And the reason you bring them out of the deficit is so they don't have to sit in these forever. And that's why when you run the 3 phases, people tend to have a lot better long-term success than just sticking them in a deficit or giving them a bunch of restrictions and saying, okay, well, good luck, congratulations, you made it here. Good luck to you. And then they leave them in the deficit. And it's just sabotage for future progress.
This person said, "Love your work and podcasts, extremely helpful, always top notch and very thorough. That said, I thought the podcast with Sarah missed some important information, such as she mentioned she was mentored by you during this process. What was your role in her success? How did you help her overcome obstacles?"
Be curious, I think, both from my perspective, and it could be interesting to hear from someone else other than me on this. How would you answer that? What do we do? What's Valley to Peak set up to do when we're working with someone?
What you do, and I do feel like I know what this is because when COVID hit and we were doing some of this at home, I got to hear you into the speaker. I couldn't hear whoever you were talking to, but I could always hear your responses speaking to people in the headset. And so I really felt like I got to see more firsthand what that relationship and what the dynamic looked like with people that sign on or just curious about Valley to Peak. So, what is your role in her success? How did you help her overcome? You ask a lot of questions. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, what makes him different?" or "What is he into?" or "Does he do seed oil?" That's what I get from moms a lot is, "Does he do seed oil?" or "Does he eat organic?" or whatever, but no, what I say that you do, I say Kyle, thankfully had a really positive weight loss. I don't know, positive at the time, but you had a really successful weight loss journey yourself. You learned what not to do in some ways, you learned what to do in some ways, and so you can make this very relatable for people. I've never heard you speak to someone about nutrition or even if you're venting about a hard part of the job, ever say, "I just don't know why they don't get it." Like, "Why don't people understand?" Like, you've never thought that the information is obvious or that it should be simple. I think you've realized how difficult the process of health and nutrition is and becoming healthy and eating nutritious is. So I'd say someone that signs on would have support, would have understanding, you're relatable. I've said to many friends, I've said, "He's really gifted at it. He really has a good way of explaining it in a way that makes sense to people." There is so, so, so much crap out there and buzzwords and terminology thrown about that it leaves it leaves people feeling so overwhelmed and embarrassed, and there's so many misconceptions, and people are just overwhelmed. People that really wanna do healthy things for their family and themselves are overwhelmed. So, what I've noticed is that you were trained on it, you put in the hours, you went to college for it, you got the degree, you learned the science behind it. I think because you really understand why it works, you can make it simple for other people. I don't think we can really teach people things without fully understanding them ourselves, and then we can kinda simplify it. So, that's what you provide. I think the process of people come in, I think you call it an audit, like, you're really tracking closely, you're learning their habits, you're learning things they struggle with, they share a lot with you about what's going on. Um yeah, I think that process is great. You slowly wean them off of needing your help. It's kind of like a trainer. I picture it like a personal trainer where, they come in and they're having to teach you a lot, and then pretty soon, hopefully, you can go to the gym by yourself and have a successful workout without the help of someone over your shoulder. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Um, so I would say, what was the role in her success? I would say this. I very much view myself as disseminating information, but make no mistake that anybody who has been in Valley to Peak, their success is 100% on their shoulders. There is a cadence to the program that's intentional. Um, we meet, with some regularity, especially in the beginning until we start to establish some really good habits and foundations. But it's not lost on me, and I'll often think about at home at night or on the weekend, it's not lost on me that these people are at this very moment doing what we've talked about today, tomorrow, the next day, right? They're walking out all of these steps. So even though we might only talk for an hour once a week or 45 minutes once a week, or as time goes on, that gets less and less frequent, because you're right, the whole goal is autonomy. Eventually, I want, what I tell everyone is, I want you to know this so much that you can't fathom why you would even stay in this anymore. That's the eventual goal. So to answer the question more directly, what was my role in her success? I would say a plan, right? A plan of some kind. I think that's what most people tend to lack. Like, the number one question that is, or the number one answer on our initial application, where it says, what's been your greatest barrier, is confusion. People are confused. They're so overwhelmed by so much that they have zero idea of where to start. And so I would say that's number one is, clearing up the confusion, but then creating a really tangible and clear roadmap of here's my next step. And then after that step is met, here's my next step. And then after that step is met, here's my next step. And those aren't like, oh, this week you do protein, and then the next week you do carbs, then you work out, and then you graduate. It's truly like a process in meeting little goals along the way, trying to get you to the whatever your overall goal is, and then transitioning into maintenance. So like our big 3-step process is you do the audit, then you run the goal phase, which is the longest piece of the program, and then we run maintenance. And then at that point you can graduate or go to like longer term accountability. But
I think what comes to mind, and I know in no way you would ever say that you are qualified to be a counselor, nor do you have the training of people that actually are nutrition counselors, but it reminds me a lot of counseling where you go in, you probably have some sort of an issue you're wanting to work through. You don't know why you are struggling, maybe, or you think, I kind of know it's this, but I just can't quite overcome this thing. At least that was my experience. And often that's the people that sign on, that's what's happening. They're like, I just can't kick this final amount of weight, or I don't have the energy to do what I want to do, or I keep falling back into this habit. And typically what happens in your process, as in any process where people want to grow and really overcome something, is you figure out what's going on. What's going on. Okay, let's trace it back to the root. Why do you think these things are happening? Or maybe they don't realize it yet. And then from there, like with a counselor, you set goals. You say, okay, next time that thought comes in your mind, try this. Or next time you're planning for a big hike, how about you try this? And then there is a ton of accountability, and very personal accountability, right? It's not like, if you it's not like those books that say like, does your child have a runny nose? Yes, no. And then it follows the track down, right? You're not just stating this issue. You are really trying to fine tune this for people. There's a few different I guess clients I'm thinking of, and they will write, I've heard you say responses to them, or they'll write in and say things like, I had just this little bit different breakfast, or I was eating a little bit more protein. I noticed this with my workout, and you will sit and explain that to them. Well, here's probably why you felt that. I mean, just, I don't know, get into the nitty-gritty of it with people that really wanna do well with this. And I think if you don't have accountability from someone that not just that has done this themselves, but that knows what they're talking about, it's a waste of time. But I think you're able to provide that. You give them the time to really figure out what they wanna do.
yeah, the second part of this, which is how did you help her overcome her obstacles? What's interesting about this, and like what I've seen evolve in working with people over the years, sort of universally, I see this among everyone, is, there's about, like I said, between 8 and 10 really fundamental things that I think everyone needs to know about nutrition, just as a general rule of thumb. And we do go through those. And those are not going to be mind blowing anyone, right? I mean, there's probably very little that I'm going to say by way of nutrition information that's just going to shatter your mind. And that's good. I want that, right? I mean, I want it to be so basic that, it's relatable, understandable, and achievable to everyone. What we tend to work on as far as, overcoming obstacles is, and where people struggle is, they struggle to know how to implement that. That's great. These 8 fundamentals are not lost on me. I've heard these a million times. How do I implement that? Here's the issues I'm running into. What's a strategy that you can help me with where I can consistently make those 8 things or 10 things a part of my life in a way that now makes a meaningful difference? And so that's where the tracker can be so helpful. Like I could care less what you do on the tracker. The tracker is not set up as far as me to get on there and harp on you for being over your calories. The tracker is set up is because whenever you say, hey, I really would have liked to have done better on Sunday at the family meal, but I don't really know how I could have. I can go in there, look at what you did at the family meal, and make suggestions so the next 52 family meals go well, right? And then you take that and you run with it. So it very much is a relationship that you develop with people, and 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, a majority of the work is trying to help people create strategies to where they can implement some of these fundamentals on a routine basis to where they start to, they do it enough to where it starts to stack up to meaningful and actual result. It's really funny because almost always when you onboard somebody and you start talking to them and they kind of give you their audit, they almost always lead the audit with saying, "This was really abnormal week for us. This looks so terrible. And it's usually not like this at all. We were just really busy." And then week 2 shows up, and then week 3 shows up, and then week 4 shows up, and you start to explain to them, "Look, you may what dominates your week may change, but you are busy. Part of why this is tough is because your perception as a rare moment is not. It's your life. So figuring out how to implement some of these fundamentals in spite of the fact that you're busy is what we need to work on." And then we go to work. But yeah, I mean, it's not lost on me that like I'm not doling out magic nutrition advice. You guys are doing the bulk of the heavy lifting, but it is, I mean, this is going to sound very cliche, but it is truly an honor when someone sees us and trusts us enough to say, "Hey, I'd like your help. Of all the freaking options out there, I'd like your help." So yeah, Sarah's a great example of that, and I appreciated her joining the podcast to share the story. Thanks everybody for joining us. If you've got any questions, you can always send those to us at info@v2pnutrition.com. We would be more than happy to cover questions that you've got. In fact, that's the only thing we're really interested in covering. So have a great week, everybody. We will be back again here in a couple of weeks with another new episode.